We're going to look at Psalm 11 today. Pastor Mike had Psalm 150 in mind, and maybe he'll have a chance to bring that to us at some point in the future. But Psalm 150, and I love the Psalms. So often they reflect what's true in our experience. There is a free and open sharing of emotions and of thought in that way, even in a relationship with God. I think it was through the Psalms that I began to learn that it's all right to express doubt and anger and sorrow, and even on occasion to argue with God. Early as a Christian, I'd come to accept that God could only be approached in a certain way, and in a way that sounded nice and almost would cover up what you're really feeling inside because it might be disrespectful. Well, I learned that you can be respectful of our Heavenly Father and still pour out your soul to Him. And few other places in Scripture find people pouring out their souls to Him like the Psalms. In this particular psalm, Psalm 11, David was faced with a situation that would cause most of us to go running. And that's one section of the passage that we'll look at. That's the condition that David found himself in. And in that condition, he received counsel. That's the second part. And the third is that David, in light of the condition that he was in and the counsel he received, he expressed confidence. David, in short, had every reason in the world to fear. But instead, he turned that fear to faith. And our purpose this morning is to find out how he did that so that we can do the same. Now, first, the condition surrounding David, primarily in verses 2 and 3 here. The specific occasion is not mentioned. It could have been when Saul sought to have David killed because he was jealous of David. Or it could have been when David's son Absalom was attempting to take his throne and usurp the throne and had caused an army to try to destroy David and those who were loyal to him. We don't really know, but we're given enough information, though, to know that it was not an enviable position to be in. The second verse here, the wicked bend their bows, they set their arrows against the strings to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? David had enemies. Whoever they were apparently attempting to take his life. They were already bending their bows, and they'd set those arrows to the string, which you know about bows and arrows. Along with aiming at your target, those are the last things you do before you release that bow and let it fly. How many archers are there here in our group this morning? People who've shot a bow and arrow. Okay. Well, I'm going to watch out for you because I know the likelihood of being on the receiving end of some of that this morning here. No, I'm just teasing. Okay. I took a class in college on archery. It was an elective class. I thought it'd be so easy to pick up a couple of credit hours as an elective. And believe me, that was a challenging class, but it was fun. But the arrows were all important. The quality of your bow, the quality of your arrow. In this case, these people were really doing this here. David was in imminent danger of losing his life. Now, some would say that the arrows being shot at him included slanderous things that were spoken about him, lies, and so forth. But it was no open attack. You see, the attack was being planned. It would be carried out in secret. It was in the darkness. It was hidden. They would shoot from the shadows. Now imagine that. If arrows were being shot at you and you couldn't see from what direction they were coming because you just couldn't see whether the darkness or the shadows was hiding it, how uncomfortable you would be, how fearful you would be in that situation. And If you were a boxer in the ring and you were fighting someone you couldn't see, have any of you ever taken boxing lessons or been a boxer in the ring before? We've got a boxer back here, okay. And so, you know, there are a lot of things involved in that. But for one, you have to be able to try to see what's coming and be in a defensive posture. And in this case, you can imagine he just couldn't defend himself. He was an open target. That's how he felt in this regard. What's more, he said that verse 3, the foundations are being destroyed. The foundations of society, the morality, the law, the order, all of these things, the decency, the fairness, all of these things were being cut down like big trees and dragged away. There was chaos in the society. The wicked were prevailing, and he writes and says, what can the righteous do? Whatever it was, there was no apparent opportunity for David to do anything about the circumstances themselves. So picture ourselves in David's situation and living in his shoes. He was under attack. He was being slandered. There were those who were attempting to take his life. The chaos in society was all around him. He could have perhaps asked for bodyguards or for law and order to be coming to his defense, but it wasn't happening. The foundations were being destroyed. Perhaps even those who were his friends were those who were a part of strategizing his downfall. What condition would it be like for him? He would be in a condition of feeling like he was absolutely not in control of the situation. What condition do you have that you have no control over? Perhaps that causes you to fear, to be anxious. Is it a relationship? Is it a health concern? Is it finances? Is it something that if we could open up your heart today and you could announce that to the rest of us, what would it be that you feel like you have no control over, that's causing you so much concern, so much fear, so much anxiety? Well, the counsel that he received, the second part of verse 1 says, flee like a bird to your mountain. Run, David, hide. Be gone, be quick about it. Fly to safety. Now, sometimes David did flee a dangerous situation. He wasn't like he was wearing a target and saying, I dare you to shoot me, standing in front of a firing squad. David wasn't stupid, but it's clear in this psalm that it would not have been right for David to flee or to run away from this occasion. The advice that they gave him reflected a response that would be timid, that would be cowardice. This is not to say that David didn't think long and hard about what these people thought that he should do, for verse 1 says, how can they say to me, better, how can they say to my soul? The words penetrated, they went down deep into his heart. How can they say to my soul? He felt the weight of that counsel. It went to his soul. What voices come in your difficulty, in your fear? Do you hear the voice which says to run from it, to quit, to hide, to get away, as far away from it as you can? Why should I jeopardize my personal peace and happiness? I don't need this. And I think there are times when the temptation is really a temptation not to deal with adversity in our lives and in our relationships or difficulty. And in a society that we live in that ever increases its attempts to escape. You know, I came across a a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He said, "You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow. You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today." You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. Now just think about the person who uttered those words. You know anything about his life story, particularly the Civil War years when he was president. You know the agony, the struggle, the trial, the depression, the discouragement, the doubt, the fear that he dealt with on a daily basis. But words like this were ringing true for him as he tried to navigate through such a difficult time in his life. You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. And therefore, the confidence expressed by David, verse 1, the beginning, "In the Lord I take refuge." Now, we've held off a long time before announcing those words. In the Lord I take refuge. In the Lord I take refuge. Now, we heard the rest of the story before this to build the reality of his situation and understand the fear that he faced. But he started this psalm by saying, "In the Lord I take refuge." What a great response. What a great model for us. "I don't mind fleeing," he would say, "but the only place I'll flee is to God." How did he have confidence that that was enough in the trial he was facing? Well, verse 4, he said, "The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne." What does that mean? Well, I think we can say it means that God is in control. He's ruling. All the final decisions on matters on earth come to his desk last. Now imagine the things that we are reading, that we're hearing, that we're watching in the news that are happening in our world today, locally, statewide, nationally, and around the world. Just let your mind ponder on that for a minute. All of it. Every bit of it. Much of it disgusts us and hurts us, and we struggle with identifying with people who are hurting so much, maybe even ourselves. All of it. God is ruling from his throne. Even more specifically, verse 4, "He observes the sons of men, his eyes examine them." He sees what goes on, his eyes examine them. Literally, his eyelids examine them. Now, you know what it's like when you squint and you narrow your eyelashes together to look at something more carefully, more closely. You know, probably some of you medical doctors, put on your particular glasses and squint those eyes to see what's going on there. Kathy and I lived in Sarasota, Florida, our first year of marriage. And I had glasses, I didn't want to wear them. So we went and took the eye test to get our Florida driver's license. And she looked at me, she said, "What are you doing?" I'd taken my glasses off, and the examiner wasn't looking at me, and I was taking the eye test, and I was doing like this, trying to squint and narrow and push it just a certain way that you could focus. Well, that lady looked back at me and caught me, and I had to wear my glasses to get that driver's license. But my eyelids were closed because they were examining, trying to see very carefully and closely what was going on there. And that, in some way, is a picture of what God does. He really does. He really is involved in a world that's full of chaos, and it seems like he's not. But that was a part of David's response and his confidence. what goes on in this world. And the Lord examines the righteous, he said, verse 5. He tries them. He lovingly refines them. He purifies them. Can you think of God doing that in your life through your trial? That he is testing you? He is using it somehow in your life to lovingly refine and purify you. Verse 5, but the wicked and those who love violence his soul hates. David ultimately had confidence because his opponents were no match for his God. Why cower in fear those who would eventually receive a punishment that they sought to inflict on him? And theirs would be a just punishment as well. B.W. Woods, in a little booklet on trust, writes, everything does not depend on you. Everything does not depend on you. Let that thought sink in for a moment. Bask in the warm relief of it. You can trust God, he writes, with yourself, your loved ones, your career, your future, your problems, your hurts. You can trust God with everything. End quote. You know, we're constantly challenged by going forward in life, not robbed with the joy of living. And we often think if these circumstances were just different, I could really enjoy my life. I could be more joyful. I could be this or that. But that doesn't seem to be the way it works for most of us, probably all of us, if we're truthful about it. Everything does not depend on you. You know, in 1938, yeah, I'll need that one too. In 1938, of course, the speech that King George VI gave on September 3rd, 1939, at the outset of war with Nazi Germany. We know about that one, and that was highlighted in the Oscar-winning film, The King's Speech, when his friend Lionel Logue helped him to overcome his stuttering problem. But perhaps less known is a few months into the war, and he was going to give the Christmas address to the nation, December 25th, over the radio. And his wife, Elizabeth, now that was mother to Queen Elizabeth that we know, Elizabeth II, brought him a poem that had deeply touched her. And George VI took out the first lines of the poem, God Knows, or The Gate of the Year by Minnie Louise Haskins. And he wanted the people to understand the spiritual resources that were available to them as that they were involved in these early days during World War II. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.
Hey, church family, we had a really interesting end to our service Sunday. And so if you were watching us online, you may not have seen the rest of the sermon because we lost power at a very interesting time. And so Pastor Rick was giving a great message, and we want to give you the opportunity to hear the end of that. But first of all, Rick, kind of just catch us up on what happened and share the sermon with us.
Well, I was kind of there by default. Dr. Mike Lawson was scheduled to preach, but he became ill. And we got the word that we needed to make other plans. So he was going to preach from Psalm 150, and yet wasn't able to do that. So I preached on Psalm 11. and it's a Psalm of David, and was concluding that message, or nearly concluding that message, with a poem called The Gate of the Year by Minnie Louise Haskins. And the backstory is King George VI of England, in December 25, 1939, gave his Christmas message to the people of Great Britain. And of course, this was during the early stages of World War II for their involvement against the Axis powers. And so what I did was start by reading this poem that either his daughter or his wife had encouraged him to include in his Christmas message. And he did. And so I was saying these words from the poem, The Gate of the Year, and I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year. And Morgan Hiley in the sound area tells me that those were the last words that people online heard. And then the power went out. It was just like poof.
Yeah, the look on your face was awesome. Like, what is happening?
Well, we were talking about in the message how God is in control. And I realized I was very much out of control and that God was in control. But a portion of the rest of the poem goes like this, and I'll say it again. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown. And so it's completely dark in our worship center here at Metropolitan. And he replied, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way. And I really felt like it was a God moment. I've never had anything like that happen in my life before. And I don't know all the reasons what was happening around us with the electricity go out, but a lot of people were affected by this in our area around the church. It wasn't just us. And so being able to read the rest of this poem in the dark, basically using a light from the phone, and then a couple other folks came up and stood along beside me. But it was just very meaningful to realize in some, I think, tangible way that God was saying, I really am in control, and you need light in these dark times, and Jesus is the light of the world. And so I said to the folks, too, that in Galatians 4:4, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under the law. But it starts off by saying, in the fullness of time. Yeah. In the fullness of time. So God is in control. He knows what he's doing, and he reminded us of that in a very strong way.
Very much.
And I'm not expecting something like that to happen again, but if it was just kind of a God thing, I believe, that was a good reminder that we can trust in him and trust in his word and trust in the Savior this Christmas season.
Yeah, I love that. And there was no doubt that everyone will remember the service, especially if you were there, and getting to go after the service even into communion. And one of our elders did a great job, even without microphones and anything else, of leading it. And like you said, that consideration of Jesus being the light of the world and being everything we need, and his sufficiency was so clear as we celebrated together. So it was a really wonderful day, not one that we planned, not one that we would have expected, but it was a blessing. And your message that God gave you was just so sweet to us. And so we are grateful and wanted everyone else to have a chance to hear a little bit of the ending of that.
Well, thank you. It's my privilege. And we love you and thank God for all of you, and pray that this is a very meaningful and joyful Christmas for you today, for this year.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Okay. Merry Christmas.